Most people think being rich and being wealthy are the same thing, but that confusion is exactly why people go broke. Because looking rich is easy, staying rich is a completely different game.
And the problem is most people don't even realize this difference. They just see income, lifestyle, and assume that's wealth, without ever questioning what actually stays when the income stops.
We all know someone making good money, living in a big house, driving a nice car, everything looks successful, until a few years later something breaks and suddenly the money just isn't there anymore.
Because earning a lot of money doesn't mean you're wealthy. That's just income, and income can disappear anytime. Real wealth is what stays even when the earning stops completely.
Income is just what you earn, but wealth is what you keep and what continues to grow. And if your income stops and your entire life collapses, then you were never actually wealthy. Rich people increase their lifestyle every time their income increases. Bigger house, better car, more expenses, and instead of building freedom, they slowly build pressure with more money coming in but even more going out.
More money starts coming in, but even more starts going out. And what looks like growth from the outside is actually pressure building underneath, because the lifestyle keeps expanding faster than the income.
Take someone earning a high income but spending almost all of it. On paper it looks impressive, but in reality there's barely anything left behind, which means progress is much slower than it appears. Then someone earning less but keeping a bigger portion of it, and over time that difference starts compounding quietly, which means the slower earner is actually building more real wealth. So when you compare both situations side by side, the answer becomes obvious. The one keeping more is getting richer, even if their income looks smaller from the outside. Income impresses people on the outside, but savings is what actually builds freedom underneath. Because what you keep is what gives you control, not what you temporarily earn. And sometimes what looks expensive isn't actually valuable, because debt can make anything look impressive on the outside, but underneath it carries weight that slowly limits your freedom over time. What looks expensive often carries hidden weight. Debt quietly builds that pressure because you're not just paying for the thing, you're carrying the obligation. Most people don't actually own their lifestyle, they finance it through loans, credit, and long-term payments, which means everything they use feels owned, but is actually controlled by ongoing financial commitments. So instead of owning their life starts owning them, because every decision is now tied to payments, obligations, and maintaining a lifestyle that cannot sustain itself without constant income. Wealthy people build a different system, where money flows into assets, those assets generate more income, and that income creates even more assets, forming a cycle that keeps growing over time.
Instead of spending first, wealthy people invest first. They direct money into assets before upgrading their lifestyle, which allows their money to start working before they start consuming it.
So over time, their money starts working even when they are not, because the system continues generating returns without constant effort, which is what slowly creates independence from active income.
So real wealth is not just about money, it's about time. Because if you can stop working and your life still continues without pressure, that's when you actually have financial freedom. Because if your entire life depends on your active income, then stopping work means everything stops. But when assets support your life, income becomes optional instead of necessary. Rich people focus on what they can buy with their money, but wealthy people focus on what they can own that produces money. And that small shift completely changes how their financial life evolves. One side spends money and resets back to zero, while the other side multiplies money and builds forward. And over time, that difference becomes impossible to ignore. The problem is people confuse attention with wealth, because visible lifestyle attracts validation, but actual wealth grows quietly in the background without needing to be constantly displayed. So when people chase how things look instead of how they work, they end up building a financial life that looks strong on the surface but has no real foundation underneath. So people don't suddenly go broke, they slowly build a system where income supports expenses but nothing builds underneath. And when that income breaks, everything else collapses with it. Because they chase attention and validation instead of financial stability, focusing on what looks impressive instead of what actually builds long-term security underneath their life. They keep upgrading what people can see while ignoring what actually supports it, and over time that creates a gap between how things look and how things actually work financially.
Being rich is visible and loud because it depends on showing results. But being wealthy is quiet because it depends on systems that keep working even when nobody is watching.
So if your lifestyle is the only proof that you're rich, then it's probably not real wealth, because real wealth doesn't need to be constantly shown to exist. So now the real question is simple. Do you want to look rich for a moment, or actually stay wealthy over time? because the choice you make here decides how your entire financial life plays out.
Because at the end of the day, everything comes down to cash flow control. Not just how much money enters your life, but how much of it you actually direct and keep working for you. Every financial decision is either pushing you forward or pulling you back, because money spent disappears, but money invested has the potential to return and multiply over time. Relying on a single income source is one of the biggest risks, because if that stream stops, everything depending on it stops too, which is why diversification becomes critical for long-term stability. Compounding doesn't look impressive at the start, but over time, small, consistent returns begin stacking on each other. And that's where real wealth starts accelerating quietly in the background. The hardest part is delaying gratification, choosing not to spend now so you can build later, because short-term comfort often comes at the cost of long-term financial strength.
So the difference was never about how much you earn, it was always about what you build underneath it, because income creates opportunity, but systems are what actually create lasting wealth. So once money comes in, the real game is allocation, because how you divide that cash flow between expenses, savings, and investments determines whether you stay stuck or actually start building forward momentum. Without a financial buffer, even small disruptions can break your system, because unexpected expenses don't wait for your income to recover, which is why liquidity becomes a critical part of staying stable. If your money just sits idle, inflation slowly reduces its value over time, which means doing nothing with your money is still a decision, and usually not a very good one. Putting everything into one place increases risk, because if that single asset fails, your entire system takes the hit, while spreading across different assets helps stabilize returns over time. Not everything that looks like an asset actually puts money in your pocket, because some things take money out regularly, and understanding that difference is what separates growth from slow financial decline. So building wealth is less about individual decisions and more about creating a system that consistently works over time, because once the system is in place, results start becoming predictable instead of random. Every time money comes in, a portion of it is reduced before you even use it, and if you don't plan around that, your actual growth becomes much slower than your visible income. Leverage can accelerate growth when used correctly, but it also amplifies risk, because gains can multiply faster, but losses can also hit harder if the system is not stable underneath. Small costs and fees may seem insignificant, but over time they quietly reduce your total returns, and that silent loss can make a big difference in how much wealth you actually build. Chasing trends and reacting emotionally often leads to poor decisions, because jumping in late or exiting early breaks the system, and consistency matters more than trying to time everything perfectly. Small, consistent actions repeated over time create better results than occasional big moves, because consistency allows compounding to work, while inconsistency keeps resetting progress again and again. Understanding money is important, but applying it consistently is what creates results, because knowledge without execution doesn't change anything, while simple actions repeated correctly build actual financial progress. Real financial independence begins when your passive income consistently covers your expenses, because at that point, you're no longer dependent on active work to maintain your lifestyle.
If your passive income falls short of your expenses, you still depend on work, but once it exceeds your expenses, that gap becomes your financial freedom margin. Taking money out too fast can break your system, because if withdrawals exceed what your assets generate, your wealth starts shrinking instead of sustaining itself over time. Time is what allows compounding to work, because the longer your system runs, the more your returns build on previous returns, accelerating growth without requiring additional effort. There comes a point where your system no longer needs your active effort to survive, and that's the moment where work becomes optional instead of necessary for maintaining your lifestyle. So in the end, it was never about earning more. It was about building a system that keeps working, because people who understand this don't just make money, they create financial stability that lasts.
Once you stop working, your entire lifestyle depends on how well your portfolio performs, because there is no new income coming in to fix mistakes if the system starts breaking. If negative returns happen early while you are withdrawing money, the damage becomes much worse, because you're pulling from a shrinking base, which makes recovery significantly harder over time. Keeping withdrawals controlled allows your system to survive longer, because when you take less than what your assets can generate, your portfolio has time to recover and continue growing.
Building multiple income streams makes your system more resilient, because if one source slows down, others can continue supporting your expenses without breaking the entire structure. Managing risk is not about avoiding loss completely, it's about making sure no single event can destroy your entire system, because survival is what allows long-term growth to happen.
When everything works together, income, assets, cash flow, and risk management, your system becomes stable and predictable. And that's when money stops being stressful and starts becoming a tool you control. Your portfolio is not just one asset. It's a mix of different parts working together, and how you allocate between them affects both your growth and how much risk you take. Markets don't move in a straight line, and short-term volatility is normal, but reacting to every movement often creates more damage than simply staying consistent with your system.
Over time, some assets grow faster than others, and rebalancing helps maintain your original structure, preventing your portfolio from drifting into higher risk without you realizing it.
Earning returns is not enough if inflation is reducing your purchasing power, because what really matters is how much your money grows after accounting for the rising cost of living. Most financial mistakes don't come from lack of knowledge. They come from emotional decisions, and sticking to a system matters more than reacting to fear or excitement in the moment. The strongest financial systems are the ones that continue working beyond your direct effort, because once your money is structured correctly, it keeps generating value even without constant attention from you. So at this point, it really comes down to a choice. Whether you keep chasing income and lifestyle, or you start building systems and assets that actually give you control over your financial future. So if you actually want to understand money beyond just earning it and start building something that lasts, then follow this and tell me below, would you rather look rich or actually stay wealthy?